It's a smoky day in New York, and that means there's definitely a fire raging in Jack Smith's various grand jury criminal investigations of Donald Trump. All signs point to a Mar-a-Lago indictment of Trump as early as this week and certainly this month. A Jack Smith actual to God Bigfoot like sighting, wearing suit and tie, carrying a briefcase on his way to a meeting with Trump's Mar-a-Lago defense team. Note he's much bigger in person, and things are much larger than they appear in Trump's rearview mirror. The Trump defense team has been told by the Department of Justice that their client is officially a target, the last step before indictment. And they had not one but two meetings with the Department of Justice officials, with reporting today that Mark Meadows has cut a deal either to plead and testify against Trump or to get full immunity and testify against Trump. Either way, there's one person who could put the football into the end zone for all four grand juries against Trump, and that's his chief of staff and White House fireplace document arsonist, Mark, I voted in two districts at the same time, Meadows. And at the same time, a suspicious pool flood into Mar-a-Lago's server room has the DOJ thinking obstruction and evidence destruction. And we have new reporting that there's not one, but two Mar-a-Lago grand juries, including one in Florida that's taking witness testimony from Florida-based Trump aides, while twice indicted Steve Bannon is called to testify before the Gen 6 grand jury in D.C. Then we head south down the corridor to Georgia, where, not to be outdone by the feds, Fulton County's own Fani Willis readies her racketeering case against Trump, and maybe a cooperating Meadows there too, and other unindicted and indicted co-conspirators with her that she's going to bring into her web, including other battleground states where Trump coordinated his effort to steal the election. All this and more on the midweek edition of Legal AF, only on the MeidasTouch network, with your hosts and practicing attorneys, Michael Popok and Karen Friedman Agnifilo. And I'm so pleased to have these history-changing legal and political events fall to us, Karen, to cover and analyze on today's show. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's very, as you said, smoky here in New York. It's shocking, actually, how incredibly smoky it is, and how dark the skies are, and it smells like smoke, and it's hard to breathe. Those are actual pictures taken by my family members that we're looking at right now. But because it's really hard to breathe. And
leave that one up, Salty. That's a time-lapse photo of the skyline in New York starting from this morning until late in the afternoon because of the wildfires in Canada that are just sitting over large portions of America and impacting our listeners and followers. But we're going to get through it just like we get through everything. And it's a terrible sign for Donald Trump that the world is on fire, because his world is on fire. And we're going to jump in right now and talk about, wow, just the build this week of Mar-a-Lago new information. It started with, there's some audio tapes of Evan Corcoran, the lawyer, and there's some notes that are really interesting, and some other testimony about a flood that went into the server room, maybe some missing videotape, and some cooperating local witnesses like maintenance workers. And then it became, wait a minute, we might have a Meadows either, and I want to get your view as a former prosecutor, either Meadows is testifying as a cooperating witness and he's gotten a deal to give himself full immunity, or partial immunity and he's pleading guilty. I'm not sure about that one. But either way, if Mark Meadows, who's the only person I believe that can put a stake through the heart of Donald Trump in at least four grand juries by himself, as the icing on the cake, I want to hear your view. If you think, if based on that reporting that's coming out of the Independent and now the Guardian, if that's true, I want to get your view of whether you think he got a free pass completely in order to bring it home in all four grand juries, or Jack Smith held out and said, no, you got to plead guilty to something, and then I'll give you a lighter sentence or cooperation credit. What do you think on Meadows? Do you think Meadows is assuming he's testifying and has testified, that he's done so pursuant to what kind of deal, what shape of the deal do you think it is?
Look, it's hard to know precisely, and I'll answer your question in a second. Just the frenzy of information though that's coming out and the conflicting information, something's definitely happening. It reminds me of right before Alvin Bragg indicted Donald Trump in Manhattan. If you remember, everyone's like, "Oh my God, the grand jury, it meets on these days and those days, and it's going on hiatus, and they're not going to meet for 3 weeks." And it turned out to be wrong. But the point was there was such a frenzy of information that people were reading tea leaves and guessing, and then two people would guess the same thing, and then now they've heard it twice from somebody else, and now it gets repeated, repeated, and repeated, so it must be true. And I worry that there's a little bit of that going on here. Clearly something is happening, it's getting out. And I think the reason a lot of information is getting out is because defense attorneys are calling each other when their client gets called to the grand jury and says, "What do you know? What's going in? Who's saying what?" And so everybody's talking and telling each other what kind of questions are being asked and what they're looking at. And of course, that's when information gets out. And so there is some information that we can glean, I think, from the reading the tea leaves, as they say. And with Meadows, I mean, his lawyer specifically came out and said he didn't enter a plea of guilty. So I don't know that a lawyer would say that if that were true, right? He said he didn't enter any guilty plea. So the other alternative, and if he had entered a guilty plea, then we would think he was going to be testifying under what we would say what's called a cooperation agreement. And a cooperation agreement means that you agree to cooperate with the prosecutor. You sign a document. You have to, in the feds, you have to admit everything you've ever done. They don't just take some admissions and not others. You have to admit absolutely everything. You have to be truthful. And like I said, you plead guilty in exchange for a cooperation. Well, his lawyer came out and was emphatic that he did not enter a plea of guilty. So what are the other possibilities, right? The other possibilities are that he was given immunity. And the reason I think it's likely that he was given immunity, and it could be full immunity, like transactional immunity is full immunity, meaning you will not be prosecuted at all for this case. Or he could be given qualified immunity, which means we won't use any statements that you have given or anything derived from those statements. They call that use and fruits immunity. And so because if he wasn't given immunity, he would take the fifth, right? He would go in and say, "I have criminal exposure. I'm going to take the fifth," because I'm sure you and Ben, who know these facts cold, can recite all the crimes that he either participated in, committed himself, or conspired with others to commit, especially surrounding January 6th. But he is such a critical witness for Jack Smith. He is the person who was the gatekeeper on January 6th, who, Ivanka came in that day and said, he's the one who got Ivanka down, and to talk to Trump. And, he's the guy who everybody was trying to, Cassidy Hutchinson was trying to get him to talk to Trump. Everybody was going to him, and he was just saying, he doesn't want to do anything. Trump doesn't want to do anything. He's not going to stop it. He had the direct line to Trump on January 6th. So that's a critical witness. That's almost the linchpin witness, I think, of the case, the final one. So that's so significant that I think that testimony is so significant that I think Jack Smith would give him immunity for that testimony. But so I think that's the likely thing that has happened here. And of course, his lawyer didn't address that in the statement that Salty just put up, right? He says, no, he didn't plead guilty, but he says that's complete BS, but he didn't address the matter of immunity, right? So, what he didn't say to me says as much as what he did say.
Well, let's talk about George Terwilliger, because of all the Jan 6th defendants, of which Meadows is one, or potential targets in multiple prosecutions, because Mark Meadows, of course, is also in the crosshairs of Fani Willis down, in Georgia for Fulton County for his interference with the Georgia election. We'll put a pin in that for a minute, because if he got an immunity deal here, Fani Willis may well consider giving him an immunity deal there, because he'd be a very compelling witness to dump on Trump and to win the case. Not just dump on Trump. It's not just a witness. If Mark Meadows flips, and every sign today indicates that he has, then the likelihood of a Donald Trump, not just indictment, but conviction has gone up exponentially, in my view, in almost every of the grand juries that's investigating Donald Trump, from Jan 6th to the grift, to the interference, to the buying of testimony, to Mar-a-Lago because of the presence of Mark Meadows at the beginning of the discussions with the National Archive, and then out the door to Mar-a-Lago. And if I'm the prosecutor, even though we'd all love to see Mark Meadows strung up by his toenails, if I had a choice and I'm trying to guarantee, in my own view, the maximum presentation of evidence I can possibly have against Donald Trump and run the table in 4 or more grand juries with one giant Bigfoot witness, I'm willing to give him an immunity deal in order to get Donald Trump. Now, to explain to everybody how this works, the prosecutors don't have to guess about what Mark Meadows has to say. They don't even have to wait to see what he's going to do in the grand jury. Well before that, and I've done this on the defense side, there is what's called a proffer. Usually starts as an attorney proffer, where the attorney says to lays out, this is what my client's testimony will be to help you in these various areas. And the government says, and then they bring in the witness. If they like what they've heard from the hypothetical proffer from the attorney, they bring the actual person in, and under oath on an on-the-record statement, he gives or she gives testimony to the government in advance, and they do it one by one. Let's talk about Jan 6 election interference. Let's talk about the fake electors. Let's talk about the Mar-a-Lago and the documents on the way out the door. Let's talk about Georgia, because even Georgia is part of Jack Smith's ambit and Georgia election interference. Let's talk about all of these things. And what's your testimony about it? What can you give the government as we're considering either indicting you or giving you full immunity? The more you give us, the more likely they are the needle moves towards full immunity, right? It's like a gauge in your car, right? If he gives a little, they're like, no, that's not great. We have that from other witnesses. Maybe we'll go easier on you on sentencing. And he goes, no, wait, I got more. They go, what do you got? More and more and more and more. So this is not shadow boxing. By the time the government reaches the point where they cut a deal, that information has already been extracted from the witness, like Mark Meadows. So they know what they have in Mark Meadows, and they know how far he's willing to go to avoid jail time. At the end of the day, Mark Meadows ends up in the trash bin of history. His career is over. His life is over. He'll write a book. Somebody will read it. But what we all want is Donald Trump brought to justice. And if you have to sacrifice 1 or 2 people in order to get him, it's something that I'm willing to do. I know it's not terribly a popular position. There's other former prosecutors that are out there, Karen, that have said, no, it'd be a terrible deal to give immunity to him. No, I don't think so. If it helps in Jack Smith's mind, it helps. I don't want to say guarantee, but if it helps make the case against Donald Trump with Mark Meadows coming through the back door of that courthouse, I'd make that deal. Would you make that deal?
It's hard to say because I don't know what Jack Smith has and what he doesn't have. And, look, there have been some deals made in the past with people, whether it's immunity or cooperation. One of the most famous ones that people like to talk about is Sammy the Bull, who, Gravano in the Mott to get, I don't even know who it was to get, but to get the head of whatever crime family it was. They gave him, I think, 5 years for committing, dozens of murders. And that's just the way prosecutors do things. Sometimes you have to flip or give immunity to, or give deals to people to get the bigger fish. And with someone like Donald Trump, I think you don't want to leave any stone unturned. That's why these investigations take so long. You want to talk to every single person, see what they have to say, and get every single document and every single text message and email and whatever it is, video, whatever exists, you're going to get it. You're going to look at it, and you are going to do a just deep dive. You're going to talk to every single person. And if it's like a puzzle that you're putting together, that you're building, and you're building a picture, and Mark Meadows on January 6th is key. So I think given that, I probably would make a deal with him. just given where he was. I don't know if I'd give him immunity unless that was the only thing available. I'd probably want him to cooperate and make him at least plead guilty. But again, we don't know. We are literally just gleaming from the drips and drabs of information that come out. Go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, because you mentioned something that I just wanted to follow up on. You said, would Fani Willis give him immunity? And I just wanted to follow up on that because I'm thinking out loud, and I might be wrong, but I want to talk this through with you, that in a prosecution, if there's a state and a federal prosecution of the same thing, the feds can jeopardy out the state, meaning if the federal government goes first and prosecutes somebody, double jeopardy attaches, meaning that you cannot be, double jeopardy is a concept in the law that says you can't be prosecuted for the same thing twice. And the federal government jeopardies out or trumps the state. And but the state can't jeopardy out the federal government. It's very interesting the way it is. And I wonder whether if Jack Smith, since it's federal, if he immunizes Mark Meadows for all of the crimes that we're talking about here, whether that would apply in Georgia. And the reason I don't know is because New York State double jeopardy law is what does this, the feds trump New York State. In New York, it's a New York State thing. I don't know if the same thing applies in Georgia, but if it does, I think it will be, he will then have received double jeopardy for Georgia, or immunity for Georgia as well.
Yeah, you may be right. And that's the competition, and a little bit of the competitive turf war between Jack Smith and Fani Willis. Fani Willis now, and we'll talk about her in the next segment, expanding her investigation to include at least 5 battleground states in addition to Georgia. And I think that's another reason that Jack Smith, although I think he was also done with Mar-a-Lago, wants to get out of the chute first and indict. And if he gets Mark Meadows, there is no, other than one of the kids, there is no more compelling witness that would have more impact on a jury against Donald Trump than Mark Meadows, putting aside if Pence is doing a good job on the campaign trail going after Trump, but he seemed, and I don't know what he did in the grand jury because it's all that part was secret, and whether Jack Smith brings him through the door during a trial against his former boss. But Mark Meadows, if you're coming up in a lab with a dream witness who knows where everything is buried, knows Donald Trump's deepest, darkest secrets, and was involved with everything. He was like the Zelig, right? He was like the Forrest Gump of Donald Trump. He was in every major event. You look in the back, there's Mark Meadows. And the reason they can get him is he has his own liability and criminal exposure because of all the bad things that he did and people that have, the things the Jan 6 committee laid out, the burning of documents in his office that belonged to the American people, presidential records and the like, his role in the interference and in the fake electors in almost deposing the attorney general at the time and bringing in another attorney general. Everything ran through, he played that chief of staff role to the hilt. He was the chief of staff for everything in criminality world related to Donald Trump. But so listen, we're going to know more as the week goes on. The reason I'm leaning towards, I think that this was an immunity deal complete, is because who his lawyer is. There's a lot of reporting on it. And frankly, if I had focused on who his lawyer was earlier, and I hadn't, I would have thought he's got the best lawyer of any of these Jan 6 defendants out there, George Terwilliger. George Terwilliger, a Bush, Father Bush, the original Bush, not W, appointee, a deputy attorney general, really well respected. If anybody's able to negotiate a way to run his client through the rain and not get wet, it's George. And so he's the one that we had to quote up about the bullshit because that's not great. His mastery in this world and his respect at the Department of Justice is pretty great. And if anybody could cut a deal like this, it would be George. But that's not the only reporting we have. It sort of sucked the oxygen out of the room today, along with the smoky fires. But the other big story, equally next to it, is we have our first appearance of Jack Smith because he had to go meet with, after they were told that Donald Trump, their client, is a target. They then met with the defense lawyers for the Mar-a-Lago side of the case, which is Jim Trusty, Lindsay, what's her name? It just flew out of my head. I did a hot take on her, no less. And John Rowley met with not just Merrick Garland's team, not Merrick Garland himself, not Lisa Monaco, but a couple of layers down, to complain about Jack Smith. But they also met with Jack Smith. And that's right after we now have reporting that they were told that he is definitely a criminal target of the investigation, meaning that the prosecutor is close or has made his charging decision. What did you make of the timing of that? Is that just the last, come on in, make your presentation, give me your white paper? What do you want to tell me just before indictment this week or next week? How did you read the granting of the audience to the Trump lawyers?
I mean, that's what happens at the end, right? That's where you are at the very end of your investigation, and clearly Trump has been told he's a target, and that's why I think one of the reasons he and his lawyers said, "Can we make a pitch to you?" You don't tell someone like Trump that you're a target until you've done you've really finished your investigation or done most of your investigation, and so I think that happened recently, and the lawyers asked to come in to make a pitch and to see if there's anything they can do. Sometimes lawyers who know that there's nothing that they can do, they know that no matter what they say, nothing's going to happen. You still go in and you make your pitch for a couple of reasons. Number one, you have to tell your client that you tried, right? And you want to make that effort. But the other reason is you're hoping the prosecutors will say something to you. You're hoping they'll ask you questions, or hoping they'll slip little bits of information that you'll get to find out. And I'm sure and in cases, and that's a lot of information that's gold for a defense attorney, right? Because otherwise everything's happening in secret and happening in the dark. And so they're hoping to get information, and perhaps they could even be discussing, surrender, and there's all sorts of things that could happen there. So I think all roads are leading towards they're at the end. We know they're at the end. As everyone has widely reported, that the Washington D.C. grand jury has stopped meeting essentially, and they're going into Florida, and that's there's two grand juries going on right now on Mar-a-Lago. That's what's been widely reported, and I think we should do a deep dive into that. But first, we're going to take a break and hear from one of our sponsors.
Oh, you're going to love this one. Green Chef has expanded their menu. Now choose from over 50 weekly menu and market items with the option to mix and match meals in the same box without changing your plan. Get everything you need at Green Market, your one-stop shop for quick breakfasts, brunch kits, wholesome lunches, and more you can easily add onto your weekly order. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well, with meals that work for you, not the other way around. Celebrate summer with seasonal recipes featuring certified organic fruits and vegetables, organic cage-free eggs, and sustainably sourced seafood. Green Chef is the only meal kit that has both carbon and plastic offset. Green Chef offsets 100% of their delivery emissions to your door, as well as 100% of the plastic in every box. Plus, nearly all packaging materials are curbside recyclable in most areas in the U.S. Bring more flavor to your table this summer with Green Chef's delicious, nutritionist-approved recipes featuring certified organic fruits and vegetables and unique farm-fresh ingredients like tart cherries, truffle zest, and rainbow carrots. My absolute favorite, spicy chicken and broccoli stir fry. Delicious. Go to greenchef.com/legalaf60 and use code legalaf60 to get 60% off plus free shipping. That's greenchef.com/legalaf60 and use code legalaf60 to get 60% off plus free shipping. Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. Karen, you like Green Chef.
I do, actually.
Chef, I know you do.
Yeah, it's fun.
And you did an ad. We'll run that ad.
Yeah,
That's coming up.
the Green Chef is it's what I like about it. First of all, the food is really good, but second of all, it takes all the guesswork out of what should I make for dinner tonight. There's no waste. I sound like I've drank the Kool-Aid a little bit, but I kind of have. Like I actually really like it, and the food's good. So
what's in the box? All right, let's go back to Mar-a-Lago, Florida. We learned that there were two, not one. It's like learning one day there are two Earths that are orbiting each other, or two Indias, if you're a Succession fan. We learned there's two Mar-a-Lago grand juries. And we'll talk about why there are, and I'll have Karen pick it up now. Karen, what you learn, what do you take away from the disclosure revelation that there is a second grand jury looking at all things Mar-a-Lago for Florida people and Florida events? And where do you think that leaves the overall? A lot of people are asking, does that mean Donald Trump's going to be indicted twice by two different grand juries? Why don't you explain why there's a grand jury somewhere else looking at similar things, and where do you think that goes from here?
So again, with the caveat that we don't know, right? Because grand juries are secret. I'll tell you what my opinion is and what I think is happening. So there's something called venue in the law, and there's it's not to be confused with the word with jurisdiction, which is different than venue. Jurisdiction means, does a particular prosecutor or court or a particular entity have jurisdiction to prosecute you for a crime? And it happens in a certain state and whatever, that's jurisdiction. Venue means, where does it happen? So where in New York, for example, would you prosecute someone? Can you prosecute someone in Brooklyn if they did something in Manhattan, right? So venue is the location of where a crime is prosecuted. And in the federal government, it's more complicated because the federal government encompasses the whole United States. And so they have jurisdiction over all crimes, all federal crimes committed in the United States. The question, though, is, where do you bring those crimes? And, venue is a tricky one, because the Southern District of New York will bring cases of financial crimes, for example, of people who, a Swiss banker in Switzerland who's never even been to New York, can be prosecuted because, the money that they used, the money goes through New York City in US dollars underneath in the wires and back. And, so you can really do a creative venue when you bring a case. But really, when you're arguing about venue, when it happens largely in a lot in one place and a little in another place, that will cause lots of motion practice by the defense, especially someone as litigious as Donald Trump. So when you look at the Mar-a-Lago case, right, he was in Washington and in DC, and he possessed all of the classified documents in Washington, DC. And he was permitted to possess them when he was in Washington, DC, because he was president, right? So, and I think the evidence is also showing that he moved to Florida, or he was in Florida. He moved all this stuff while he was still president. And so again, at that time, he still was lawfully able to possess that. So when did the crime occur for possessing these national security documents or these classified documents? And really, substantially, the crime has occurred in Florida. The possessing of them, the obstruction of justice, the not turning it over when the Department of Justice asked for it, the whole fight with the National Archives. I mean, really, most of this happened, they moved the boxes a few days before that the search happened, and then they moved them back after. A lot of this, really, the gravamen of the crime happened in Florida. And I think, and I believe what's happening is Jack Smith, because, the grand jury was in Washington, D.C., they put witnesses, and the investigation was there. But then they started to shape the case and write a prosecution memo, right? That's the document that all federal prosecutors put together before they bring a case, and then they give that to their supervisor. And it gives, these are the facts, this is the evidence, these are the possible defenses, these are the sentences, this is the ranges. It just gives the whole story of the case, and the strengths of the case and the weaknesses of the case. It's the Bible of a case and a defendant. And so I think Jack Smith, wrote this, or probably had a working document that was a prosecution memo as it went along. And then it turned into an actual document that was shared with Merrick Garland. And, that's when you sort of get permission, if you will, right? I'm recommending indictment. Now let's talk about what all the issues are. Let's talk about what the defenses are. Let's talk about what the legal issues are of the case. What are the evidentiary issues of the case? And I think in that conversation, venue had to come up as one of the number one questions of where do we bring this case? Now, on the one hand, Jack Smith and prosecutors will have wanted to bring the case in Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. federal judges, I think they're used to cases involving classified information and classified documents. Criminal trials involving classified information and classified documents are very complicated. You have to have special hearings. There are these laws and rules under CIPA, the Classified Information Procedures Act. And, it's something that you have to balance national security with the defendant's rights. And it's a whole complicated process that Washington, D.C. courts are used to dealing with. I don't know if Florida has any experience in that. So I think that, that's one reason they would rather have the case be brought in Washington, D.C. Another reason I think is, Washington, D.C. has a diverse jury pool where, Florida tends to be more conservative, and obviously Florida is where Trump lives, and he's very popular down there. So it's if you're a prosecutor, you'd rather have the case in DC. And like I said, plus as they were investigating it really started there. But once you realize that there's venue issues with definitely some of the charges and probably some of the defendants and those charges, because we don't even know how many people are going to be charged, right? We think, and we know, well, we believe that Trump will be charged, but there could be lots of other people charged in the Mar-a-Lago documents case, right? We don't know how many defendants there will be. Well, some of them might have nothing to do with DC and only have something to do in Florida. So I would say what's happening in the fact that everybody's saying that the DC grand jury has gone quiet and the Florida grand jury seems to be hearing witness testimony. I think a very educated guess is that at least some, if not all, of the charges will be in Florida. I would think that they'd want it in two different places and have two bites of the apple, if you will. But I wouldn't be surprised if the entire case is down in Florida. And just to remind people, you don't need to, federally, you can put hearsay in the grand jury. So even if all the investigation happened through testimony under oath in the DC grand jury, you could just bring an FBI agent down to read those transcripts in the Florida grand jury, and all of that transfers to Florida. So for all we know, that's what's happening, and we'll see an indictment come out of there soon. But that's what I think it's looking like more and more. But, it also could be as simple as the pool guy, who we're going to talk about in a minute, who flooded the pool, lied to FBI agents, and that's a crime. They call it a 1001 crime. So for all we know, they're just indicting him in Florida. And, and then they're going to squeeze him to cooperate. So we just don't know, but that's, I think, where we are vis-a-vis Florida and DC.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take. I think it's going to be President Trump for the former President Trump, and for the espionage indictment and obstruction out of the District of Columbia and tried there. I think there's enough territorial and jurisdictional hook for the Washington, D.C., for really almost everything Trump, that he'll be tried there. I think you're right. There are some really just local crimes, including the 1001 lying to federal agencies, federal officers crime, where people like Walt Nauta, not the maintenance worker, because he's already out of the clear. He's cooperating. But Walt Nauta, the butler, valet, whatever he's supposed to be, that was moving the boxes and driving him up to Bedminster. I think that's a wholly Florida-based crime. He doesn't really have the connection. The court doesn't probably have personal jurisdiction over him in Washington, D.C. So I think the obstruction type stuff for the local henchmen is going to be a Florida case and an indictment. I think the Espionage Act and the things related to the other grand juries for Donald Trump are going to be a Washington, DC indictment and trial of Donald Trump and those that matter. That's the way that, for me, that's the way it shakes out between the two things. And we have, for instance, as an example, testifying today is, and then we'll talk about your comment about venue, is Taylor Budowich, who was one of the main spokespeople for Donald Trump, effectively his press secretary, currently has a very big job with his Save America PAC. And he's been brought in front of the grand jury to testify about when the original part of the scheme to defraud the National Archive by Donald Trump at the very beginning in early 2022, when Donald Trump and the National Archive figured out that Donald Trump had 15 boxes. Remember how quaint that was when there were just 15 boxes to worry about? And then this is how we got to subpoena and search warrant. Before that, it was the National Archive going through their records and saying, we're missing these known things. And then Donald Trump turning over finally 15 boxes, the National Archive going through them and saying, holy crap, there's top secret and classified documents in there. What else does that crazy ex-president have in his offices? Then subpoena issued by a federal judge. Then when he played games with that, search warrant. But in the beginning, when they got the 15 boxes, there is reporting, and this is what Budowich would have been testifying to, that Donald Trump wanted the message to go to the National Archive, that's all he had. It's just the 15 boxes, not the 13,000, including 100 top secret classified, just 15 boxes. And so they want to know from him, Budowich, what was the press statement? What was Trump's involvement in it? What was the basis for you telling the National Archive, which is effectively a lie and misleading them, that there were only 15 boxes? They're trying to get inside Trump's head from a criminal intent standpoint. And that's where witnesses like this one play such an important role. Because if you follow this from the beginning, what Chief Judge Beryl Howell of the Chief Judge of the Circuit Court in DC, who was supervising the grand jury, she's the one that made the decision based on the evidence that it was more likely than not that Donald Trump had committed a crime or fraud with Evan Corcoran in the way he handled the documents, therefore taking away Trump's attorney-client privilege and his discussions with Evan Corcoran, leading to the audio recording that Evan Corcoran did, apparently musing into a recording app about his thoughts and hopes and dreams about the case. That got turned over. 50 pages of notes got turned over. But that's where it started, this finding that the judge made that there was a crime committed. And she also said that she saw what he did, Trump, in interacting with the National Archive, to be his dress rehearsal for what he did against the Department of Justice and the FBI later. He was trying to see how much he could get away with. And that's where these kind of witnesses come in. And if they're really local and they don't really have necessarily a nexus or a hook to DC, then Jack Smith's like, great, we'll just open up another grand jury. Go ahead. So I think there's going to be indictments that come out of that. But I think the one we're all waiting for, the Donald Trump one for Espionage Act, which looks to be the focus, that the retention of national defense information, NDI, whether it's classified or top secret or not, just the fact that it's NDI is enough to convict him for Espionage Act. And I don't see a defense for that, because it either is or is not national defense information. He can't magically convert a national defense information document into a grocery list or into his acceptance speech, or a speech at a rally. It is what it is. It is intrinsically what it is. It's not like classified documents where he can try to make an argument, I declassified them. You can't de-national defense information them. And so that is one of their easier cases. And then, of course, the obstruction of all the things he did to hold on or retain these things.
Yeah, so let me just...
let me do a shout out to the chat. Lindsay Halligan was the name I was grappling for, and the chat let me know the name, and I was like, "Thank you to the chat. Thank you for telling me that." I couldn't grab it quick enough for the podcast.
Yeah, because we're live tonight, so
we're live every night, Karen.
Yeah. Okay, Popok. No, just two things I wanted to say, which is, if you're Jack Smith and anybody else paying attention, I think you really want this case to potentially get prosecuted and go to trial before he is, as soon as possible, right? Because he's going to potentially be the nominee, and then he's going to run, and he may or may not win. And so you want this done quickly. And so if you bring it in Florida, or the vast majority of it in Florida, you take venue off the table. And the reason I would want to do that if I was the prosecutor is because if it's in Washington, whether it survives or not, and I think you're right, it will survive, it's going to be litigated. And then we've missed our window to try him, and that's it. And so I just think that from a timing perspective, you're going to want to eliminate every issue, because there is no venue issue with respect to Florida. The other thing I just wanted to say was they also could just do the 2 venues. And remember, they did that with Manafort. Okay. In Manafort, they charged him in both the Eastern District of Virginia and in DC because of these types of issues. And so it's been done before. And there are people who are on Smith's team who was involved in the Manafort prosecution. So they know how to do that, obviously, too. So we could see it in both places. But if I were Jack, I'd be thinking long and hard about Florida, just to get this moving as fast as possible, take as many legal arguments off the table as possible, so that we have a chance of actually going to trial, prosecuting, and convicting him.
Yeah, agreed. And we're going to talk about another prosecutor who is hot to prosecute Donald Trump and put him in jail. And that's Fani Willis in Fulton County, which is Atlanta, for those that don't know the area, in Georgia. And she's got her arms around a multi-tentacled RICO racketeering conspiracy case. And we'll talk about that next. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Our next sponsor this week is Highland Titles. At HighlandTitles.com, you can become a Lord or Lady of Glencoe for less than $50. Now, thanks to a quirk in Scottish law, you can buy 1 square foot of land in Scotland as a gift. Highland Titles has been selling these plots of land for 16 years and have more than over 300,000 happy customers. They use their profits to manage the land as a nature reserve, and the Highland Titles Nature Reserve near Glencoe is one of the most popular nature reserves in Scotland. People travel from all over the world to find their very own plot of land. You get a personalized luxury gift pack and help conserve the beautiful Scottish Highlands at the same time. Now, Highland Titles literally spread ownership of the land amongst thousands of people. It makes it impossible for developers like Donald Trump to turn the landscape into a golf course. It's a really cool gift that makes land ownership a possibility for everyone. You can use the discount code LEGALAF to get 20% off at HighlandTitles.com. With your purchase, you get a fully personalized, instantly available digital download with access to a dashboard where you can check out the webcams and the exact distance you are from your plot at any time. Just head to HighlandTitles.com and use code LEGALAF to get 20% off at checkout.
How many of you wish there was a better solution to paying off your debt? PDS Debt has customized 0% interest options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. With rising interest rates and the cost of living at an all-time high, now is the time to finally take initiative with your debt. Stop waiting and start saving with your own custom debt savings options from PDS Debt. PDS Debt is giving our qualified listeners a free debt savings analysis just for completing the 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/legalaf. You'll receive a full breakdown on how to save on interest each month and the quickest way to take care of your debt. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances aren't going down, this program is for you. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low 0% interest monthly payment. Everyone with over $10,000 or more in debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit accepted. Save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time. PDS Debt is offering free debt analysis to our listeners just for completing the quick and easy debt assessment at www.pdsdebt.com/legalaf. That's PDSDEBT.com/legalaf. Somebody said, fix the focus. It was focused. It was smoky that day when I recorded that. Depends. This room has a million windows and it's really hard to get it just right. like for this podcast. So anyway, we do appreciate people looking out for the production values of the show. We're doing the best we can. We really are. Let's talk about Fani Willis. Good. Wait, you're on mute. Now you're not.
But now talk about production value. You're like, press the mute button, Karen.
Get the mute button.
I know. No, my favorite one was when we were recording one summer and you were sitting outside and it was like bright and beautiful. And we just watched the sun go down and it was like Popok in the dark. So.
There was another one where I was in Miami at my Miami office and it had terrible, we fixed it, but for some reason we had terrible Wi-Fi. I had to go outside in an alleyway alongside the office, set up this thing. If you guys had seen the contraption that I was sitting at, you'd be amazed. And because it was the only place I could get my cell phone to work to do the pod. This is talk about, we've come a long way, baby. And then, but of course, it was like whatever time in the afternoon, and literally by the last 20 minutes with Ben, you could barely see me. Like if I wasn't blinking, I don't think people knew I was. Is Popok After Dark. But here we are. So let's talk about the other prosecutor who we love.
Yeah, exciting things happening.
Who recently made a connection with me on LinkedIn. I was very
wow.
Fani Willis accepted
impressive.
my LinkedIn invitation. Very and I'm hoping she's a big fan of the show because there's no bigger fans of her than you and me and Ben and what she's doing there. I want to, there's been some speculation. Let me frame it. Then I want to ask you a prosecutor question. So Fani Willis is the latest news is she's definitely going Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organization Act. RICO, the Georgia RICO, unlike the federal RICO, is even more robust, more muscular. She probably has at her disposal more powers to connect the dots, combine crimes, combine bad guys in one indictment than probably any other prosecutor in America. You know, that's how robust and how different and how powerful Georgia legislature gave their prosecutors this particular law. She can combine state and federal crimes. She can go extraterritorial, which is what she's doing. She's looking at the way we look at it. It's not just Georgia that he wanted to steal the election from. You know, he needed, it's sort of like, one of these Avenger movies. He needed all the jewels. He needed like a number of battleground states. That's why he was doing, Michigan and Arizona and Wisconsin and all. He needed them all to go his. He needed to like run that table. And so she's like, Georgia's not by itself. Georgia is one of several places where this criminal conspiracy was focused, right? We were the victim, just like these other places. So she's opened up the investigation broader. She's brought in the two consulting firms that Trump paid millions of dollars to, but then hid the results because he didn't like them when he was told point blank by these relatively credible consulting firms, there's no voter fraud in any of the places. I don't know what you guys are talking about in your lawsuits. I mean, this is my artist rendering. There's no voter fraud. There's no dead people voting. There's no multiple voting. There's not enough. There's always fraud in the election. There's always a little bit. There's a little bit of fraud. There's always a little bit. But it's in such tiny microscopic numbers. It's never enough to overcome like a 7 million popular voter or the winning margin in every battleground state. And so Trump was told this directly, including with Meadows, by the way, by one of the two consulting firms, Berkeley Research, in the White House. And the other one, Simpatico Software, that she's interviewing, they gave their results, same thing, no fraud, to the Trump campaign. And yet Trump was out there saying the exact opposite. There's fraud in all of his lawsuits. So that's crime. That's crime mind. And that's what she's trying to get to the bottom of. So here's the question for you. There's a little bit of already criticism that she's making the boat too big, that she doesn't need this expansive of a RICO conspiracy in order to win her case. I want to get your view on this because you put together cases like this. Why do you think she's doing it? And what do you think it does to the strength of the ultimate case that she gets out of the indictment and brings to a jury?
So there's two kinds of indictments. So don't forget, an indictment is literally just a piece of paper, and it tells you what your charges are. It essentially says, defendant, this is who you are in the county and state of New York or Georgia or wherever. you are charged with the following crimes on the following dates and times. And if you recall, Alvin Bragg's indictment of Donald Trump was what they call a bare bones indictment, and people were frustrated by it because it was the falsification of business records and it didn't say anything about what the facts were, et cetera. And so he filed a statement of facts to go along with it, and that's where you got a lot of your information. There's another kind of indictment, though, that's not a bare bones indictment, and that's an indictment that tells a story, or a talking indictment. And those are typically done in cases that charge either conspiracy or RICO. Those are the two, I would say, main types of indictments where you get to tell a story, because the crime is all about the story. It's not about, a single act. I stole a bag of potato chips. You were accused of stealing a bag of potato chips from the local grocery store on this date. There's no whole story about who you are and what you do. It's just a one-time crime, whereas these crimes are all about an organization. And the RICO, it's all about an organization with a hierarchy that has the singular purpose, or the same purpose, to further criminal activity, and this is what you do and how you do it. And so you, by its very nature, you have to describe it. So I think one of the reasons she likes the racketeering or RICO indictment is it gives her an opportunity to tell a story. And it also gives you an opportunity to, when you tell the story, to bring in other facts that you might not otherwise be able to bring in. And so that's because you're going to prove these connections and these purposes and these intentions. And so as a result, you get to bring in all of this other information. And really, honestly, there's no way to just talk about Georgia without talking about the whole thing. He wasn't just, he wasn't just saying, find me 11,780 votes. Because he wanted to steal them. It wasn't a theft, right? What was it? It was a nationwide, sweeping criminal conspiracy and effort to overthrow the federal election. And he did that in multiple states, and he did that in multiple ways. And so it's hard to just tell the one story of the one perfect phone call and leave it at that, because in order to put it in context, it does grow into this much bigger thing. And so I think that's why she is interested in it, because I think it really it really shows that this is something that she can build the sweeping narrative and show this pattern of behavior that Donald Trump engaged in to overturn the 2020 election. Georgia really is just one piece of this puzzle, and it's going to be interesting to see what it ultimately looks like. But Georgia is known for having a RICO statute that, these RICO statutes are state by state, right? So each state legislature passes their own RICO statute that are similar but have its own elements, and the federal government has one too. But Georgia's RICO state statute is widely known as being one of the most expansive ones in the country. It allows prosecutors to bring in acts or conduct that occurred in both Georgia and other states. It also specifically, I believe, allows you to build a case where you're violating both state and federal laws. Don't forget, again, by comparison, another challenge or criticism to the Alvin Bragg case is, can you use the federal election laws as the bump up to the falsifying a business record? People say it's a state crime. You can't use a federal crime to make it a felony. Well, here, the Georgia statute specifically allows that. So that's very expansive. It also allows for up to 20 years in prison. That's a really serious crime. And I think it'll just be very interesting if she can prove, the elements. And basically, to do it, she's going to have to show that there were two criminal acts that occurred that are designated crimes. Again, it can't be low level. It has to be certain crimes that will be designated in the Georgia RICO statute. And there have to be 2 of them. And there has to be a pattern of behavior that was done with the same intent to achieve a common result. And so I think she'll be able to prove that, given what we know. But boy, is she taking on a lot. This is a big case. Part of me wonders, why is she going to do it? Why is she taking on, she's got this, the perfect phone call. I'd say it's perfect for a different reason. It's a perfect isolated crime that she could prove. But on the other hand, don't forget, if a Republican wins the presidency, even if a Democrat wins, to let the country heal and move along the way they did with Richard Nixon, Trump can be pardoned federally for federal convictions and federal crimes, but he can't be pardoned for state court ones. So I do think it is important, if she can bring it. I do think it's going to be a big, huge case, and it's going to be very complicated to do, but it's a complicated crime, and I think she's up for the task. She's used the RICO statute before in novel ways. I mean, she's known for RICO was passed as an organized crime, mafia type statute to show these criminal enterprises, essentially, right? These criminal organizations with hierarchies and structures, and prosecutors over the years have used these crimes. This crime, this charge, in other types of crime, and she is known for that in Georgia, where she has applied it in other areas. So if there's anyone who's smart enough to do it and who knows how to do it, it's her. But I think she got into a situation where the investigation just kept going and going and going and going, and that's what the case is. So it'll be very interesting to see, but it's not going to be a bare bones indictment. She will tell a story, and we will have a lot of information.
Yeah, that's the greatest thing about RICO anywhere. She'll have pages and pages of narrative where she gets to just tie it all together. And in any RICO conspiracy, you are, when you're indicted, you are as guilty as the next person for the crimes committed by the others in the co-conspiracy, even if you didn't do it. You might have hijacked the car. That guy might have burned down the building, but the carjacker is responsible for the burning building, and vice versa. And so she'll have all of these crimes, and she'll be able to put it on, thinking about, as we all do, as trial lawyers, projecting into the courtroom about how this plays out in front of the future jury. Even the little smallest cog in that giant machine is going to get crushed by the indictment, because Giuliani's going to be responsible for the perfect phone call, and Donald Trump's going to be responsible, as he should be, for all of the fake lawsuits and the pressure on the legislators, and the Georgia Republican Party officials that aren't cooperating with Fani Willis. They're like David Schaefer, the head of the Republican Party there. He's going to go down for everything that Donald Trump did. And that's the beauty of the conspiracy. It gives, as you know, as the prosecutor, it gives just tremendous runway and leeway to present your case and to tie together all of these disparate things. And just one last note for those that are worried, Karen's so right about federal pardon, federal case. Some people might be thinking, oh crap, because Georgia is red. We thought it was purple. I actually thought it was going blue, but it looks kind of red at the governor level. But this is a very interesting side note, because Georgia had a number of corrupt governors. Surprise. They took away from the governor, which most governors have, the right to issue pardons. So you can't lobby the governor for a pardon. It comes through a committee, and the committee, which is kind of made up of blue and red and purple, makes the ultimate decisions about pardons in Georgia. So some people might think, well, it won't matter because it could be a Republican in the governor's house. But no, this could really stick. Just like the ones in New York, we don't have to worry about the governors there, because they do make the decisions on pardons, and they're not pardoning. The Democratic governors are not pardoning Donald Trump. So look, we're going to follow Fani Willis. Let's just keep the, I don't have the Popok Porter board tonight, but let's just keep it straight. We've got one indictment already, Alvin Bragg, Karen's old office, Manhattan DA, for Stormy Daniels cover-up hush money. but we all expect he's going to expand that into other. Now that he broke the ice, he gets the credit, broke the ceiling. It can be done. Other prosecutors, we can indict Donald Trump and arraign him. And so he's fighting his war there, and then he'll expand that, we believe, with a separate indictment on other crimes, bigger crimes, now that he's starting to get some cooperation, hopefully, from people like Alan Weisselberg, the longtime CFO, while Jack Smith, we said it was going to be this week, maybe because of the Florida indictment, grand jury issues, maybe the Mar-a-Lago thing rolls into next, but it's a June event. I think just to keep, if you're keeping the calendar at home, I think that it's June for Jack Smith, at least on Mar-a-Lago. If he gets Mark Meadows, which the reporting is he has, it could speed up some other indictments there as well that are up against Donald Trump in the District of Columbia. And then July/August is Fani Willis in Fulton County. By the time this guy hits the primary season, if he ever gets there in 2024, he has a criminal trial in March of 2024 in New York already set. He's got these indictments, probably 3 in number, if not more. And this is your candidate, ladies and gentlemen, of the Republican
And don't forget,
Party.
he's also, in October, he has the Trump Organization Attorney General trial. I mean, he's going to be
bankrupted.
Yeah.
Again, he's been bankrupted 3 times before that. He's the only person in the history of America that lost money running a casino. That's how great of a businessman he was. He couldn't find a way to make money in a casino. Think about that. next time somebody says he's a great businessman, we need him back in the Oval Office. So we need to follow these things at the intersection of law and politics, because I think we do it in a way that others aren't doing it. And certainly the people in our audience who are here tonight in large numbers, we hit 15,000 at some point. I think Salty told us that we were the number 3 YouTube live show. I know people think it's like, oh, well, it's all that self-aggrandizement. No, we're happy that we're providing something, and we're with a community that we enjoy and that enjoys us, and that we're just happy about that. So that's where we are. We've reached the end of another midweek edition of Legal AF with Karen Friedman Agnifilo and Michael Popok. People ask us all the time, how can we help this growing network? Because you can only find it on the MeidasTouch network. And it's all free. It's all free. You just, the sponsors are great. We love our sponsors. They support the show, keep the show on the air, so to speak. But the other way that we can be supported is all free. You subscribe for free to the MeidasTouch network on YouTube, which is where we put all the hot content. We put this show, we put all the hot takes, we put all the other podcasts for the MeidasTouch network, to Lights On, to Political Beatdown, to all of that, and all the other content creators that are only on the MeidasTouch network, like Texas Paul, who's in our chat today and has appeared, people like that. You go to the MeidasTouch network, subscribe on YouTube. But the audio version of what we do is really important to us as well, to keep us kind of at the top of the charts and keep us credible and keep us viable. And so that is wherever you can get your podcast from. That's Apple Pod, Google, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all sorts of places. And you just put in Legal AF and do it both ways. If you liked what you watched, we did a lot today, a lot of earworms, as people like to say. Go listen to us. And that helps with the algorithm and helps the network overall. And then we've got a store. You ready? You ready, Salty? We got the MeidasTouch store, which we're refreshing under Karen's leadership, with T-shirts and coffee mugs and different things that you'll be seeing over the summer. And that's another way to show your support for the show. And that's it. And then just continue to comment and thumbs up what we do. And we take it to heart. We make changes on the fly. We're very into quality control and trying to bring you what you want. And that's the way you can communicate with us, and through our own social media. Both Karen and I are active on our social media. You can find me at MS Popok there. Thank you, Salty. And Karen, we'll put her back on the screen with her KFA Legal at KFA Legal. And it's another place that you can, we're not just known for it. We regularly communicate with the audience there. Happy to do it. And so that's it. So we're going to have a Saturday show, as always, with Ben find my solace, and then back next week on a Wednesday. Hopefully the air is cleared over all of America and Canada and North America, and we can breathe easy again, knowing that Donald Trump is just this much closer to being indicted and going to jail. Karen, last words.
So I've been hearing a lot of frenzy. People are saying that the indictment's coming tomorrow. I don't know. I hope it's true, but I we'll see. You just a lot of chatter. But before we go, I think Salty found some old photos of Popok descending into
Jesus.
darkness.
Oh Lord.
This is us doing that's Popok descending into darkness during the podcast. So
Wow.
yeah.
Wow, that is that was embarrassing. Who was that guy?
You know
Yuck.
what? I think it shows it's authentic. We're authentic, right?
We are, man. Like you said to me recently, or you were texting in our chain to prepare for the show. You're like, I got my don't let anything happen this week. I'm traveling. I got my mic though. I'll jump on. And you did.
True.
How many times have you done shows for either CNN where you're a regular, or with us where you of course are a founder, and done it from the back of a moving car at a high speed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you just got to do it where you got it's more important, I think, to get the information out quickly and do your podcast than whether or not your hair is done or you have perfect lighting or whatever. I mean,
Ben does it in increasingly smaller hotel rooms. Every time we see Ben, if he's on the road, the room gets smaller and smaller. But Matt, I mean, there is nobody. We once had a thing where during the show, this is early on, so most people weren't even there. I'll just tell this last story. Ben's internet went out in his house. He drove in his car to a local bagel shop, set up outside, and we finished the recording.
I love that though. It just shows, but I just want to say one last thing, which is I'm traveling again tomorrow night. And I was thinking of changing my flight because of this chatter of this indictment tomorrow. But if I change my flight, it'll never happen. But of course, I didn't change my flight, which makes me think maybe it could happen. So I don't know. I'll leave you at that with my,
Well, we'll promise this to the audience on the way out. When something momentous happens, you can be assured that some combination of Karen, me, and Ben are going to jump on a hot take, or going to jump on a live feed on the MeidasTouch network and bring it to you. We're not going to abandon you because it's important to us. So until we meet again, which could be any hour now at the pace of these prosecutions, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, Michael Popok, shout out to the Meidas Mighty and the Legal AFers, and see you next week.